as Minister for Tourism and President of the B-grade Horror Movie Writers Guild, I have personally expelled from this land countless writers who have debased our image in the West with this absurd vampire smear. But beware, Australia too has countless dissidents and capitalist lapdogs who are already producing comic strips and films depicting Australia as a nation of crude, insensitive, beer-spilling bores, coarse yokels, and guzzling hicks. Barry McKenzie holds his own.
G'day, happy Australia Day, and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about films, not features, based on comic books and comic strips depicting Aussies as yobs. We are your hosts, Jordan and Kumar, that's me.
And me.
And I don't know about you, Kumar, but I've got a thirst you can flame and photograph. Allow me to crack a tube of the Amber article. Oh shit.
That was just like the movie. It
just like the movie.
Sprayed everywhere.
Yeah.
That was legit.
We strive for realism on the podcast.
We should be videoing this. Okay, so this week we are going to talk about the sequel to Barry McKenzie, which is called Barry McKenzie Holds His Own. Before that, we have a few orders of business. One is, we had some messages about Dread on YouTube.
Yes.
Okay, so we got this comment from Rogue Trooper 9871. So this is a legit 2018
fan.
Yeah. And this comment says, Anderson doesn't wear the helmet in the comic for the same reason as the film. Doesn't say what the reason is in the comic. In the intro of the movie, you can also see Chopper graffiti in the blocks. Another nod to the comic.
So Anderson doesn't wear her helmet in the film because it interferes with her psychic ability.
Yeah.
Not just because the actress is hot.
Yes.
But she also does not wear it for the same reason then in the comic. Okay?
Yeah.
It's good to have that confirmed, because we were talking about that.
Yeah. Okay, and here's a comment from Primark X. This is also in Dread 2012.
Sounds like a 40k aficionado. All right.
One correction. When Anderson lets the techie guy go and says she's still a judge and able to dispense justice as she sees fit. And says she's still a judge and able to dispense justice as she sees fit. You said Dredd had no reaction, but I'm pretty sure he shrugs as if to say, well, you can't argue with that. He's gaining increased confidence in her abilities and suitability to be a judge. So it's a point in the movie's favor.
Absolutely.
Because it fills in a bit of plot holishness, maybe, that we thought there was in there last week.
Yep.
A couple weeks ago.
And she was right. I mean, that's the letter of the law, or
Yes.
that's the letter of the rules, and we know that's what Dredd does. He follows the letter of the rules.
Yes. Okay, another point of business. I have an apology for the listeners because last week I mentioned Jodorowsky's Dune and I did not ring the bell.
Oh, shit.
We were really out of practice. I didn't have the bell on the table and didn't even think to ring it when I said the D word.
We'd had a bit of a break.
Yeah. Yeah, we had been off for a couple of weeks. So apologies.
We were a bit rusty, yeah.
Okay, I also looked up some dates.
Great.
This is related to the last week's episode and this week's episode.
We were a bit vague on dates last week, so that's fine.
Vague on certain dates of when the new wave started. The
Aussie New Wave,
Aussie New Wave. Wake and Fright and Walkabout both came out in 71.
Okay.
That's before Barry McKenzie, 72.
Yes, a whole year, yep.
Yeah. The Bruce's Philosopher Song from Monty Python is 1970.
Ah, very good. But I think Humphries' claim was that it was the comic that maybe inspired that, not the film.
Right. Oh, okay. So he... Well, I would say...
I don't think you can take these
when
kinds
you
of
read the second movie, I think pulls a lot from the Bruce's Philosopher Song. Almost more so, if you know what I mean.
Well, they do ramp up
There's almost a literal no puftas line in this movie, which is straight out of the Bruce's Philosopher
Don
Song.
Spencer delivered it, which was a bit of a mindfuck for me, because Don Spencer, I remember from Play School.
Oh. Right, okay, so Play School is like a kid's... It's like your Australian kids...
It's the most wholesome, imaginable television show aimed at children, and Don Spencer was on it when I was a kid.
Okay. So it was after.
The 80s.
Yeah, okay.
So to see him hosting the citizenship test and declaring straight into the barrel of the lens, no puftas.
Yeah.
I think a part of me withered up and died.
Well, okay, I also want to mention, we also, as I was reading the third volume of these comics, there's a whole bunch of back matter, like articles that appeared at the time. Some are like reviews, some are things that were written by, like, Humphries himself.
Right.
And there's a Sunday Review article here written by Humphries from 71. So this is before the first movie came out.
Got it.
But maybe it was about, or they were working on it. I can't remember. But he wrote us a message. It says, Scholars of the Future. That's us.
Oh, yeah.
Scholars of the future with an interest in the sub-literary trivia and ephemera of our epoch may also detect, particularly in Barry's hostile attitude to taxi drivers and psychoanalysts, a fugitive note of anti-Semitism in this comic.
Right.
This element was gratuitously introduced merely to bring the strip into line with the finest traditions of Australian black and white humor, as any student of Phil May or Norman Lindsay will readily appreciate. I didn't really understand the last part of it, but, because I don't know who those people are, but I think he's saying that we were supposed to read Barry's anti-Semitism as Barry McKenzie's anti-Semitism, not as Barry Humphries' anti-Semitism.
Yes, I imagine that's the excuse that's the same rationalization they offered in the documentary that was attached to the DVD. And it's also, I come across it again this week in doing reading about the gratuitous kind of, well, the homophobia and the anti-Semitism and the racism that pops up in this week's episode. And I finished that book that I was telling you about, the Barry McKenzie movies, which is quite laudatory, quite glowing in its praise of the film and of Humphries. And, you know, like, again, all you can say is, like, you know, this film says these things, but, you know, Australians were saying these things in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. Okay, just because you're repeating them doesn't make it satire. If you repeat them and you're just relying on the fact, you're relying on people to just know that you're not serious.
Yeah.
You're not critiquing then, you're performing.
That's right. So satire needs a context of some sort around it to be satire. Otherwise, it's just a statement.
Correct. And in fact, this is one thing, I mean, we're getting right into it right off the bat. The homophobic remarks and also the racist remarks are constant in this week's movie. Which, I mean, on the other hand, this film is much broader in its humour, which is a context, as you pointed out. It's much more indiscriminate and ridiculous. Yeah. So Barry seems less offensive because he's surrounded by so many other caricatures. It's more easy to place him in his context as a caricature. But having said that, it's too much. It's too much and it's all the time.
Yes. Well, I think as I read the rest of the comics and as I watched this second movie, I had the same feeling about both of them, which is that I'm enjoying this a lot more and I'm hating this a lot more.
As opposed to the comics.
Both. I felt that way about the comic. Reading the rest of the comics, they're so funny.
Oh, I see, right.
Some of them they're so clever, they're so funny, but then he says a thing which is like, it's missing the context. You're just saying that thing. Yep. And in the movie too, the first hour of this movie, I was laughing. Yeah. There were funny jokes in this.
So much happens in the first 20 minutes even.
Yeah, and I was like, I can't believe it, I'm enjoying this. But then you go on and then sometimes some of the racist, sexist, homophobic things are not coming from Barry, they're coming from the world. They're coming from the point of view of the camera.
Right.
It's not a thing that Barry says, it's a thing that happens in the movie.
Yes. There are moments like that, you're right.
Yeah.
There's one bit where I don't understand the point of this scene. So there's a scene where Barry's mate gets him a prostitute. Yeah. Although we don't quite know she's a prostitute at that point, right?
Yeah, in the comics she's
it's from the comics.
Oh, this is one of the moments in the movie this movie has less from the source material from the comics.
Sure, I noticed that. But there are moments.
But there are moments, including the sequence where he goes to France is in the comic. He meets this guy named Colin Lucas. He's this Australian guy that's been living in France, and he speaks this hilarious mishmash of Trey Bonzer.
Yeah, I thought it makes it all into the film.
It is all in the film, and the guy in the film looks like the guy in the comic. But he goes to France, and when they go up to like Colin's apartment or whatever, there's a prostitute on the landing, and as Barry goes up there, she gives him a huge kiss on the lips, and he freaks out about this. He's convinced, because he's heard these stories about guys getting VD. He thinks his nose is going to fall off. Yeah. And he's obsessed, and he runs off to the doctor to get treated, and the doctor tells him to bring back to do all this various stuff, gets medicine, whatever. He runs back to the apartment, he starts breaking a chair, and they're like, what are you doing? He's like, the doctor said he needed a stool sample.
Double entendres.
Yeah.
There's a lot of...
kind of a sequence like this. But how did we get on it? So you were talking about the...
Just about this scene.
Yes.
So this scene makes it into the movie.
Yeah.
In the film, this scene, Cole procures the woman for Barry instead. But again, he's freaking out because he thinks his nose is going to fall off. He keeps checking it in the mirror. Yeah. And then he takes off, he goes, because he's absolutely hung up on sex.
Yes.
He talks about it constantly, but he's, once again, he fails to lose his virginity in this movie. He takes off, and then she robs him.
Yeah.
And then Cole the Frog, this character, played incidentally by Dick Bentley, an Australian comedian with a tremendously long career going all the way back to the 1940s. He was also the vice cop in last week's... in the first film.
Oh, okay, that annoying character. Yes.
Yeah.
I never would have put that together.
Until I looked it up, I didn't either. Anyway, he comes in. We don't see his face, but we know it's him because he's carrying a baguette. He's always carrying a baguette. And then she gives him all the money, and he gives her one note.
Yeah.
So he's her pimp?
It seems that way.
What's the point of this?
I don't know. It's not in the comic. It's this thing that's...
Why is this here? What?
I don't know.
She's a hooker that robs you, and his mate's a pimp?
Yeah.
It just seems cruel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Certainly not funny.
Yes, and I'm not sure why it happens that way.
Is it meant to show that he's... It might be foreshadowing, because Cole turns out to be a bit dodgy, doesn't he, towards the end of the movie?
Oh.
But even so, he's dodgy because he's a communist spy, not because he's a... not because he's a freaking flesh peddler. Yeah. Whatever. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Is there anything else about the comics you'd like to say before we move on to the film properly?
Oh, okay. Now I got to flip back through my notes a little bit.
We're going in reverse this week.
We're going a little bit backwards. No, that's the main storyline from the later volumes. Oh, I do want to... Well, I wish I'd read some of these because they're amazing, especially at the point of cancellation. So you're reading a bunch of strips. There's a sequence where he goes to see the Queen. He ends up at Australia House where they're doing immigration tests for people that want to immigrate to Australia.
Okay, so this was...
Yes, that's in the movie. So, but it plays a little bit differently. It actually put Barry in charge of doing this. And this beautiful woman comes in, and she says, I want to go see my boyfriend in Australia. And he's like, whoa, I got to keep this beautiful woman here. So he has to go against his true nature and start complaining about Australia and say how everything's better in England or whatever. But then his immediate higher-up, who had put him in the position, they're like, okay, you've got to do this Aboriginal dance as like a test. So she strips naked, they paint her,
yes,
and then she does this dance, but then their boss comes in, he's like, what is this? This is a disgrace. You're besmirching the pure name of Australia, etc., etc. But somehow, while he's at Australia's house, he gets tickets to go to Buckingham Palace or something. And they go in there, there's a hilarious sequence where he goes in, he sees the Queen brushing her teeth through a window, and he says, that poor lady, it's like she's living in a fishbowl and has no privacy, but he's the one looking at her. It's really funny. And she had once visited Australia and smiled at him as a baby, and he comes in, he's convinced that she remembers him, and he's like, I love the Queen. He loves the Queen so much. But then Philip comes, there's a lot of funny stuff where... I can't describe it all. It's written so well, because there's a whole thing where she keeps saying, we do this and that, and Philip comes in. He doesn't like Philip, because Philip's like Greek or something, and he's like...
Philip the Greek.
He doesn't like her. But when she hits her head or something, and she says, we this, we that, and Philip says she's using the royal we, and he says, Barry's like, get her on the toilet quickly, that kind of thing.
Very silly.
Yes, now why was I getting up to this? Why did I want to mention him, but... ending up in jail. Oh, okay, so I was trying to get to the point where he gets canceled. Okay, he gets broken out of jail by a fellow Australian who happens to be touring the Tower of London. He's in the Tower of London.
Of course he is.
This dentist happens to be passing by who's Australian. But this guy's very shady, and he's running a he has his surgery is a dentist on one side and a gynecologist on the other.
Amazing.
And he's got all these people, and there's a lot of racist stuff about, he has all these like African dignitaries that he's ripping off in there, and he's like putting people to sleep and ripping off their money, but he wants Barry to get to work. He does like 700 jobs a day because this guy's such a scam artist. And so he sends Barry in to pull this woman's tooth. Barry doesn't know how to do any of this. He's got the manual, dentistry manual. He's like, how do I do this? He's like, well, I got to inject this painkiller.
Novocaine?
And also this man the dentist has this assistant, Australian assistant.
Yep.
So he's got this woman on the table,
I saw that, actually, I saw this one, I read it.
Okay, she's on the table, and Barry's like, okay, so I got injected with this, so strip off, so I can have more flesh. And it's genuine. He's like, I don't know where to put this, so just take all your clothes off. And he's like, oh, you're uncomfortable? I'll take my pants off too, so you'll be more comfortable. Yeah. And then he like has to climb on top of her. He's trying to inject her in the butt for this dental surgery. And then suddenly there's a notification. You get a page where it says, at this point the strip was canceled. And it's like, and it says the message is that I can't remember what the excuse was from the publisher. And it's the way Humphries describes it, it sounds like he's making a big deal out of it. Because maybe he was just late with the strips or was drinking too much or something like that. But no, then you get to the next strip and you do see the guy had a legitimate reason. Not legitimate. He had a specific reason for canceling at that point. Because the next strip, the dental assistant comes in and she's like, oh, you're so beautiful. I'm super hot for you. I'm stripping off. She strips naked. Barry's like, holy shit, lady. Okay, let's get her on. And the lady does not care about Barry. She cares about the naked lady, the naked unconscious lady. And she starts sexually assaulting that naked woman.
Right.
While she's on the bench. Barry's freaking out because he always freaks out whenever an Australian lady is not dignified.
Yeah. Yes.
And then he runs off to his next adventure.
So you think it was cancelled because this strip landed on the desk of the editor?
I think that was like a bridge too far. The lesbian sexual assault scene was like, this is going overboard. I actually thought I loved it. Like I thought it was so over the top and it was just like amped up to such a level of ridiculous Barry McKenzieism that I really thought it was great comics. Is it offensive? Probably highly offensive, but I thought it just worked. It was just such a great ramping up to that point of craziness and great punchline at that stage.
Yeah, in the prologue that I read for the volume that you gave me, Humphrey says he doesn't know why it was cancelled.
Oh, okay.
He said that it had been published very intermittently over its life because he was frequently late with the strips, either because he was just had other projects on or because he was on a bender. Mm-hmm. But he said had caught up by the time it was cancelled, and in fact he claimed he had 5 months worth of strips.
Well, we do get all the strips after that that were not published. The unpublished strips.
Yeah, they were drawn later by Nicholas Garland, I suppose. Or maybe he'd already drawn them. I
don't know. There's a joke line where it says these were pulled out of a Swiss vault. Something like that. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, yeah. The adventures that follow lay for many years in a bank vault in Switzerland. They appear now for the first time. This is how it's described.
Excellent. Last week we talked about Peter Cook, who's credited in that very long credit. I mentioned that he's a well-known kind of like British humorist and performer. He was very closely associated with Private Eye. He basically owned the magazine. Right. Which is presumably why he approached Humphries and asked him suggested he put a comic in it. He put a lot of his own money into it to kind of keep it afloat.
Right. Okay. There was somewhere
and that's why he's in the film too, I suppose.
Right. Somewhere I saw some speculation that the boys who were publishing Private Eye were close to the royals and were worried about offending them or something. That seems far-fetched to me.
I don't really know what the content... I know that it was kind of like a gossip magazine. Yeah. Kind of a muckraking rag.
So why would they be worried about what the royals thought about a comic strip that was appearing on the bottom third of some page? I don't know.
I did also look up Peter Best, the composer. Okay. Just a coincidence that he has the same name as Pete Best from the Beatles. Or not quite from the Beatles. No, hilariously, he's a composer that does film scores. Right. He did a lot of film scores in the 1970s.
Right. Okay. So at the very end of this book, he goes back to Australia. He meets his brother Kevin, who was the preacher, but has now turned gay and is a huge buff dude and has an Aboriginal... there's some Aboriginal man or woman, I couldn't really tell, also homosexual. There is a funny line there about how there's no longer any discrimination against Aboriginal plumbers because this person had advocated for gays for plumbing or something like that.
Speaking of Aboriginals, you mentioned the corroboree that they do in the Australia House. Yeah. there's a corroboree. There's not a corroboree, but there's a woman painted exactly the same way in the first film. Last week.
Was. Yeah, that's right.
Clearly a reference to that particular strip.
Yes,
I would say.
Yeah, it seems to be. Yeah.
Because it's the same painting.
That's right.
It's not
exactly,
a genuine. It's not a genuine way that Indigenous people paint themselves.
Yeah.
So you should just kind of look a bit silly.
Yeah. Okay, I'll read a few quotes in my Canadian accent, which I enjoyed in this volume. Serves you right, you palmy bastard. I hope your balls turn to bicycle wheels and backpedal up your arse.
Makes it in the film.
That makes it in the film. I really laughed at that one. I'm as clumsy as an old emu trying to screw a jam tin rolling downhill. One storyline I want to mention was he meets this Japanese girl.
Yeah.
And she's got her face behind a fan the whole time.
That's right.
And there's a lot of racist... You know what the problem with this is? If Barry makes comments about color or eye shape, it's the most polite way I can put it, that's one thing. But for her to be saying me likey kind of stuff, okay, now we've gone over to the other side. But anyway, there's a storyline where women are constantly horny for Barry and it always goes wrong somehow. Yeah. And then she reveals how her father had impregnated her mother. He was from Australia and then ran off. And he's like, I don't want any Japanese food. And then he uses it like a slur. And she's like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, oh, I hate the Japanese or something like... I can't remember how this all came. Anyway, she that's when she delivers a story about her father, who is Australian. And he's like, oh, it's okay then, you're half. Like, that makes it okay. Even my mum might kind of accept you. But then she pulls away the fan finally. She's got an enormous chin, and we realize that
it was Barry's dad that had impregnated her mother.
Yeah.
That
these were all they were all really
funny.
Pretty good storylines in there. Okay, so he does meet up with the psychiatrist de Maurier again. That was his name. Was Delamphrey. He does meet up with him again, and Delamphrey has just returned. He's also leaving Paris. They've just been to a conference about the orgasm or something, he says. So that's a little tidbit that we'll need for the movie plot.
Yep.
That might be it. I guess we can get into the movie.
Excellent.
So we start with a statement from some sort of government minister.
He's a senator, and he's the minister for culture.
Yeah,
something like that, or the advancement of Australian culture. He's a kind of prototypical. There's a character that Humphries would do later called Celeste Patterson.
Okay.
Who is this? Basically, this is the embryonic form of that character.
Okay.
He's like a coarse, crusty civil servant,
right?
Who's just foul-mouthed and retrograde, and dense.
Right.
So this is kind of an early version of that. Yeah,
he's very rough, but he's talking about the cultural renaissance. There's one of the articles that Humphries has written in the back matter of this volume. He talks about how he doesn't believe there's an Australian new wave happening. He thinks it's all
what a surprise
made up, or he says that it's only Australians see it. It's nobody overseas has noticed this thing that's happening, which maybe was a little bit true. But anyway, in this movie, we're getting a statement from some minister saying this is happening. But as you said, he has, I don't know if he's crude, but he has a way of, his accent is so thick. He says Italian. When he talks about the Italian Renaissance, he calls it the Italian Renaissance. Right, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's funny. He's in his office, I assume, and there's an enormous can of Foster's behind him.
Yes. Yeah.
On the wall. And there are Lamingtons on pedestals.
Yes.
About the office.
Yeah.
And he goes over to a bookshelf which has, humorously titled volumes, including one called Venomous Toads of Australia.
Yes, that's when he pulls down. He's specifically talking about something else, I think.
Yeah, he's not talking about the venomous toads. It's just supposed to be a funny title.
Right.
Because Australia is a place with grotesque wildlife, and what's more grotesque than a toad? There are, of course, no native toads in Australia.
Right.
There are only an awful lot of cane toads, but they're introduced.
Right. Right. Okay, now we get the opening credits, which they're shot by plane through the clouds.
Yeah.
It's a bit like opening credits of Superman.
Yes, it is like that. Yes.
But before Superman.
But there is just a lot already. It's pretty obvious that there's a lot more money this time.
Yes. And we get a whole song which is much better than the song we got last time about Barry McKenzie holding his own.
Yeah.
There is...
Who do you want for your very best mate? Barry McKenzie.
Yeah. There is no mention of the comic,
I noticed that as well.
unlike last week. And there is no credit for Nicholas Garland anywhere in the beginning or end credits of this movie.
Strange.
Why is that? Has Barry Humphries' star started to rise? Have they separated from Private Eye and don't want to mention the source? Even then, why not give a special thanks credit or something to Nicholas Garland? Seemed pretty disrespectful to me.
I agree.
Very rude. Then the movie starts, we're on an airplane, and we get a chyron which says the first English language film with English subtitles. This is actually pretty great. Throughout the movie, we get English subtitles, and this is pre-airplane, where they're speaking, and we get subtitles. Sometimes the subtitles are exactly the words they say. Sometimes they're slightly translated into standard English. Sometimes, like
There'd be more slang,
like the appendix or the glossary in the comics, it'll be another slang term which you don't understand either.
It's very funny.
It's really well done and random. You don't know when you're going to get one of these subtitles.
There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason.
Sometimes they're on screen too fast to read.
Yeah. It's really funny.
They're on a flight to Paris.
It's Frog Air, because it's a
Frog Air. The hostess says, "I am your froggy hostess."
Yeah, and she's got literal live frogs under a glass bowl.
Yes.
But of course Barry's not interested in that foreign muck.
Yes.
He just wants a tin of Fosters.
Yes.
And Edna's there as well.
And he makes a comment about the Japanese again here, some offensive slur, and then she makes a kind of also offensive comment, but as she says, they're our friends, or something like that. So immediately I was like, okay, this is better, because now there's a context. You got two people who are, the correction to Barry is a non-correction, right? It's an offensive correction. So I was like, okay, this is already working. Everything's working a little bit better.
I felt the same way, but for different reasons. For me, it was the fact that the film had become more fantastical,
right?
And the slurs had been expanded to include the French.
Yes, that's true too.
So this Frog Air thing, like the pilot is just literally having sex with the stewardess.
Yeah, he's got a picture. He's got like a pin-up of a nude woman in the cockpit.
In the cockpit.
Yeah.
And then the stewardess comes in and sits on his lap, and they just start making it.
Yes.
And
You're
planes.
so French. Oh, we got to do what's the most French thing in this movie at the end of this episode.
We'll do that.
Actually.
We will have to do that because it's in quite a lot of it was shot in Paris.
Yes.
Like one of them lights up. Another one of the stewardesses lights up this enormous cigar.
Yep.
Yeah, it's quite funny.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Auntie Edna is wearing a tiara. And some guys at the front of the cabin look back and say, that's the Queen.
Yeah.
And they seem to be looking for the Queen of England, and they think...
Well, they've got a newspaper that says Queen goes on holidays incognito.
Yeah.
And then they start comparing notes. One of them is adamant that Edna is the Queen in disguise. Oh, not in disguise, just incommunicado.
Yeah.
And that Barry is her bodyguard.
Yeah.
Because he's a strapping bloke with an enormous chin.
Yeah.
And they talk about how they need to get her to Transylvania. Well, do they mention Transylvania yet?
I don't think so.
They say they need
But we know they have a plan. Like, these guys are scheming.
They want to kidnap.
Yes. Yes.
And they say that we have to do it, or you know what the Count will do, or you know where he'll send us.
Yeah.
And then it says, Australia.
This is that's a bit later, but yes. This is a bit like Fantastic Four 97. Or 95, actually, the Roger Corman one, plot-wise, in terms of you got these two goons.
Yes!
Working for this
I thought of that
foreign
too. Yes.
royalty.
The exact same thing, the two goofy... one of them even looks kind of like the guy from the bigger one.
Yeah.
Whose name is like Absolute Cretin or something like that.
That's right. That's right. It's almost a James Bondy kind of name.
And... I thought, oh my god, two cretins in 2 movies in 2 months.
Yeah.
Not bad.
But, this is interesting because the first 5 minutes of the movie, suddenly we have actually an overarching plot. Like, we have a narrative for the movie, which we didn't have in the first one.
Another thing I was just pleased to see, this movie, I don't know if it's just Beresford's doing better as a director with his second movie.
Yeah.
But it's just so much tighter.
Or just knowledge that they need to have a plot this time. They can't just wing it.
He did co-write it again with Humphries.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the scenes, a lot of them just work a lot better. The production values are higher.
Yeah.
Kind of like the editing is better.
So I'll tell you a weird thing that happened to me watching this scene on the plane was Barry meets a bunch of other Australians at the back of the plane. Now, one of them is named Scrotum, which is the name of a character from the comic.
Yep.
scrotum something or other. And they start popping open beers, and the beers, of course, shoot up. They're spraying the cabin. They're falling off their hats. As always, I didn't even register. I was like, oh, that's fine. I wasn't like, this is a funny joke. I was just like, okay, this is fine.
This is what happens when you're having a beer. Well, it happened earlier.
It was just, I've been programmed. Like, you know what I mean?
Amazingly, just any time anyone opens a beer in this film, Barry McKenzie Holds His Own, it always shoots 3 meters in the air.
As it did last week. But then, because
it's even more extreme this week. All right, apparently, Barry Crocker claims to have figured out the knack.
Okay.
To shake it up just right and open it just so to get that effect every time.
Wow. Well, he did it.
They recognize him from behind by his hat. They don't even see his face.
Yes. So Barry bumps into the doctor on the plane, which is the other Edna character. And here's your first sign that they've really got a lot of money. We get split screen shots where you get Edna and the doctor on screen at the same time.
Yeah.
Which we definitely didn't have in the last movie.
It looks good.
It looks really good. And in fact, again,
you couldn't even see the line down
for
the
a second, I didn't register even that it was happening. I was just like, wait a second.
Yeah.
That's the same actor.
Yeah.
They've actually had to do a special effects process shot to do this.
Yeah. Humphrey was apparently joining the Mile High Club in the bathroom with a beautiful woman of colour.
The first of probably 20 beautiful women in this movie.
There's another sign of the higher budget.
I'm very suspicious of the casting that was going on here. Whether we're actually choosing actresses based on their acting ability.
She's American.
Yeah.
A black American.
Yeah.
And yet, and then we get the first real proper kind of slur that made me genuinely uncomfortable.
Okay.
Barry says something, he goes, how come a bloke like me can't, how come we're always striking out with the ladies when a limp-wristed so-and-so like yourself is able to go a knee trembler in an airport dunny with an abo?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, she's not Australian, she's American.
But he calls the Africans in the comic, he calls them African abos.
Yeah.
And the other word he uses all the time is tinted.
Yeah.
Anyone of any
Auntie Edna uses that as well, yeah.
Yes, that... Yeah, it's hard because it's hard to guess what the context... I mean, is there a cultural context that I'm missing from being Canadian that should be here that makes it obvious that he shouldn't be calling her that? Or is it okay for her to be calling her that?
I don't think it was okay to call a person obviously from... I don't think it was okay even in the 70s to be saying this kind of thing.
Right, okay.
I think only scumbags and racists were saying this kind of thing. This is not something you said in polite society.
Well, I was hearing it when I arrived in 2004. So, okay. They arrive in Paris. There's a great scene where he goes through the metal detector, and you know what's going to come.
But then it's so much more. It
actually short circuits. Yeah, I didn't expect it to short circuit. It explodes because he's got so many cans strapped to him. He opens up. It looks like a bomb vest. So these French guards come out. They yank the cans off of them. They start machine gunning them.
They're all exploding and shooting beer everywhere.
I was laughing at
it's really funny.
So much that was happening in the first 20, 30 minutes of this movie.
It's amazing the pace as well. There's just so much happening in this first 20 minutes.
And also maybe I was getting used to the language a bit more. And
maybe the subtitles probably helped too.
That too.
But I want to point out that it doesn't just look like a bomb vest. It looks like he's wearing a suit of armour under his clothing made of beer cans.
Yeah.
The scale of it.
Yes.
It's not like it goes down his arms.
Yes.
And it covers his entire torso.
Yeah.
From top to bottom. And he could not possibly have been wearing it.
Yeah.
He knew it was coming, and yet the scale of it was so much more, so over the top.
Yeah, I really didn't expect the whole machine to short circuit and explode. That was great. It was all great stuff. I was really having a good time.
And the bumbling henchmen are taken aback by this.
Yeah.
They realise that they say, oh, he's armed.
Yeah.
Some kind of Molotov cocktail.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they put their plan on hold because they're already scheming to get Aunt Edna away from Barry, but they keep bumbling it up for one reason or another.
And I think this is the stage where they call Transylvania.
They are on the wall, on a phone that's just on the wall.
Yes, they call Count Eric Count von Plasma, played by Donald Pleasence. This is a wowie zowie.
Yeah.
I mean, his name's in the credits. I didn't expect him to be the main villain of the piece. But he's playing an actual vampire, which I liked because Sometimes the strip does go into kooky territory, like when we get the ghost of his great-great-grandfather hanging around and stuff. And there's a bit of a nod to that in this movie as well. But I did like that it's a bit more comic strippy in that way. Like, there's a bit more freedom with this one.
Yeah. Well, it's much more...
It's less grubby as well because of that.
Yes. It to me, this... I don't know if the word elevates might be hyperbole, but it's certainly, to have this fantastical setting, enhances the comic elements.
Yes.
And makes, as you said, less unpleasant.
Yeah.
You can... These characters, the things they say and the way they behave is more obviously stereotypical and silly than it is in the film, where a lot of it was... I mean, it was still very silly, the film last week, but it was also played straight quite a bit as well.
Yes.
Here, there's no playing... You can't play a movie with a vampire in it straight. This is just bonkers right out the gate.
Yes.
Donald Pleasence is absolutely hamming it up. He's wearing fangs. He keeps going...
Yeah.
He can't say... Is it K's or C's?
C, something like that.
Every time. And he's Transylvanian, so he's actually a vampire communist.
Yes.
We see him pick up the phone.
There's a major plot line.
It's funny. He picks up the phone and he's wearing a ring with the hammer and sickle on it.
Yes, and the flag of the country has the hammer and sickle and fangs. Like vampire fangs on it.
But, so, Transylvania is, of course, in Romania, which was a communist socialist republic from the late 40s through to the late 1980s. And... not part of the Soviet Union, but very definitely part of the Eastern Bloc. So if you want to set your film in Transylvania in the 1970s, it's got to be... Socialism, communism has to come in it somewhere.
Yeah.
Because this is a communist country at that point in time. But it's funny because he's a vampire. And also he's a count. You know, there are no counts in communism. There's no... And yet he does come out with Marxist rhetoric occasionally. Like we talk about that. This is a terrible embarrassment on the working classes of Transylvania.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually... The country is called Transylvania. It's not called Romania.
Yeah. So he has some scheme. He wants the Queen to boost the tourist industry in Transylvania. I'm not sure how it
Again, there was no tourist industry because of the Iron Curtain.
Yeah.
So this again is ridiculous.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to point out that Young Frankenstein came out in 1974. So maybe there's something in the water at this point in time. Because he's got his Igor type as well.
Oh yeah, there's an Igor, yeah, that's right. He's called Daphne or something. He's got some sort of Dorothy. His
name is Dorothy for some reason. I didn't know what that joke was about.
Some of the writing is also a lot crisper. There are some funny lines. He says, for example, "I want Her Majesty in Transylvania by noon on Friday night."
Yeah.
Because he's a vampire.
Yeah.
And also he puts his hand on the hunchback and he says, "I have a hunch that that they will be arriving very soon." It's so lowbrow, but I really laughed.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking all this stuff too.
Donald Pleasence is just, he's a great actor.
Yeah.
In any role, and he's really funny in this.
Yeah. So, meanwhile, back in Paris, Barry and Edna meet up with their friend Colin Lucas.
Call the Frog,
who has lines like Trey Bonzer out of the comic. They go up the Eiffel Tower, they do some sightseeing, he vomits off the Eiffel Tower.
They try to poison him.
Oh, that's right.
The henchmen, they go to a restaurant and Cole the Frog orders their meals in his hilarious Aussie/French patois. Patois, as he would say.
Yes.
And the smaller henchman asks him how he'd like his steak. And there's a funny line where Barry says, "Just knock the horns off, wipe its ass, and bung it on a plate."
Yeah, that's in the comic. He also says, "I could go with steak," and the subtitle says, "I could go with steak."
I'm surprised that line made it in the comic, because Barry seems like the kind of guy that would eat his steak well done.
Well, then in the next strip, they actually bring, like, the head of the cow on a plate. And he complains about how raw it is.
Anyway, we see them injecting a substance into his steak, but it doesn't have the desired effect.
Right.
Although it does make him cry Ruth.
Yes.
Off the balcony.
Yes.
And he does that. He goes, "Ruth!"
Yep.
And they go down from the tower and walk off, and the henchmen are stunned to see that he's survived this. And then they look up and...
the vomit hits them.
They get hit by the vomit. Somehow Barry beat the vomit down.
Yeah, that was the gag.
Yeah.
They were so high up.
Yeah.
But, I mean... Again, this time somehow the vomit didn't gross me out as much as it did.
Because it's much more ridiculous. It's silly.
It's more like the Mr. Creosote meaning of life vomit.
Whereas in the film. It was a small quantity, and it was straight on his head, and it looked like real sick.
Yeah.
Here, this time, I think it was soup, tin soup.
Right, okay.
Like chicken soup, basically. So it looks a lot faker, and of course the quantity is not realistic. So our brains immediately say, this is not real.
Right.
So you're not as grossed out.
Right. There is some, back in the airplane, Barry ends up peeing on the doctor's face. That grossed me out again.
Does he pee on his...
Yeah, because the doctor inspects his penis and by accident. And I don't know. Anyway.
He says, Doc, I've got a little problem, and he's at head height with his junk, and he goes, very little.
Yeah. Okay, so now they go to Barry goes to this, burlesque striptease kind of show.
Yep.
Which plays pretty funny.
It's very funny.
Because one of the performers recognizes Barry.
Yep.
And she's actually lies down for the sequence where she's supposed to be whipped, and she does get whipped, but she doesn't care. She's having this conversation with Barry while it's happening. Barry, as a comic, is offended that this Australian...
A nice, clean living Aussie girl has been corrupted by the filth of the old world, and he tries to rescue her. She says a girl's got to eat. That she sticks a whip in her mouth. The handle of a whip in her mouth. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Anyway, she's Nerida is the name of the girl. She used to apparently be like a girlfriend of Barry's. It's sort of hinted, or at least or maybe that they used to hang out together on Bondi Beach.
Yeah.
But she has a boyfriend back in Australia, slaving up to pay for that plot of land. Anyway, the Nerida is played by Little Nell, who's a kind of a well-known Aussie expatriate.
Okay.
She was in the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Okay.
As the tap dancer, whose name I've forgotten.
Okay.
But yes. And she also owned a famous nightclub in New York called Nell's for a long time.
Right. They do some sightseeing. Barry is like, why don't they knock this old stuff down and put up
a nice drive-through bottle shop.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's a very Australian thing, by the way, and they talk about it all the time. Nowhere else in the world has drive-through liquor stores. It's the most shocking thing to me to this day, 20 years later. I'm still like...
As Clive James's character says, blood oath.
Yeah.
So Clive James is in this movie.
Right.
A young Clive James with hair.
Yep.
He plays Paddy, the film critic who's scored a $20,000 grant to go and watch flicks.
Yes. Yes. Yes, because Australia's becoming so cultured, supposedly back home, that they're just the money's given away these grants, which they have done for this movie.
This is a bit of scorn. Well, not this movie, no.
No, right, okay.
So here we have a bit of Barry Humphries' scorn for...
Oh, I see.
For Australia's new wave and the federal government spending money on the arts.
Right.
He's scornful of that. Mm. He thinks that he doesn't approve. He thinks that this is all just a bunch of hot air, and also he doesn't approve of the government funding the arts because he thinks it goes to unworthy people.
Huh. Okay.
So I wouldn't be surprised if we're getting a bit of his prejudices here coming through in there. Because it's kind of funny because they're all such drunken...
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's the funny thing. It's like they're running a scam on the government, basically, by taking this money. I think the movie's pretty clear on that.
And this could be... If I were feeling charitable, I would say this is a bit of good-natured ribbing about the fact that their first movie was funded solely by a grant.
Right, yes.
Of $250,000.
Yes. Yes.
But this film, since we're discussing it, this film was funded entirely privately. Right. Specifically by one guy, Reg Grundy,
who
was a producer of television programs.
Okay.
A creator and producer of television programs, including Neighbours.
Okay.
And the Australian version of Wheel of Fortune, which makes our later scene a little bit funnier too.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, we'll get to that. So now we get the scene with Colin's call girl, which we talked about earlier. There's a funny bit here.
Another beautiful woman who was a London model.
Okay. Here we get a scene where Edna is next door and she's washing her clothes in the bidet. I actually love this, but there's a gag like this in the comic where when Barry arrives in France, he goes into the bathroom and he's like, why there are two toilets? Maybe one's for chundering and one's a toilet.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, there's a very family-friendly version of that in Crocodile Dundee, right? 15 years later.
Yeah.
But I just love that we get this smash cut to Edna washing her clothes in the bidet. It was really good.
Yeah, because he's worried. He's trying to beg off from sleeping with Germaine.
So while they were on the plane, the doctor said he was coming to France for a conference on Christ and the orgasm. So we get that, as I mentioned earlier, was kind of a nod to the comic.
Yep.
We get to this. It's actually held in a church, and it's Kev is the one that's doing it.
So we've combined two stories.
Combined two storylines, which it works pretty well, I think.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does.
So here we get some more split screening effects where we've got Barry and Kev on screen at the same time. Kev has this really funny way of speaking in Taoist and doist.
It's a bit like it was like that in the comic too, but he's a bit like Cole the Frog in that he delivers these un-Australian kind of cadences and words in a profoundly Australian accent.
Yes.
So he says, "Thou dirty dingo" in a later scene.
Yeah.
Which is the only one I bothered to write down.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so they have this conference, but the bad guys who've been trying to abduct
Edna,
who they think is the queen.
Well, they
want to get rid of the
they've
bodyguard.
been trying to get rid of Barry this whole time.
Yeah, because they think he's her bodyguard.
Yeah.
Now he's got a twin brother up there. They think Kev is Barry.
Yeah.
They knock him out.
Yep.
So now Barry has to deliver the sermon about the orgasm and answer all these questions.
Yep. They tell him you can't let Australia down.
Yes.
So he puts on the collar.
Yep.
Of a minister, the backwards collar, and he goes out. He doesn't give a sermon. He just takes questions.
He takes questions. One of the questions, the last question, is what is a rat bag?
Yeah.
Because this is a term he uses all the time.
Yeah.
And now suddenly the movie breaks into song. Unlike the previous movie where it's like, let's sing a song, please sing a song, Barry. Yeah. Here he just breaks out into song, and there's music coming from nowhere. He sings this rat bag song.
Yes, so it was diegetic music in last week, and this week we're straying into non...
Yes.
I mean, he is performing.
Yes.
But now we're taking leave
Air
from...
orchestra. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So...
Yes. Non-diegetic, certainly.
Here's the thing about this song. He talks about what the definition of rat bag is, who is a rat bag, and it's finally he just starts stringing off a list of people, including Pakistani waiters and
Poof Deliberators.
Poof Deliberators.
Yeah.
He said there's only one person that's not a rat bag, and I thought, okay, this is a good line because this is explaining what this is all about. And he prejudiced against everyone except himself. This works for me actually.
Yeah.
Because when you hear those lines, it's shocking. But when he says there's only one person that's not a rat bag, I'm like, okay, I get it. This is actually, it makes sense. This is the context we were looking for.
Yeah, this is a pretty catchy song.
Yeah.
It's alright.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
So, while this is happening, Edna is abducted by the bad guys. They finally managed to get...
Everyone loves this song, of course. This is something that happened in the comics constantly. People would get caught up in something like Barry's earthy Australian charisma.
Yes.
Almost. And would start hallooing and carrying on and poorly and like doing malapropos versions of Australian kind of words. So everyone in this building, which it's in the Palace at Versailles. I'm sure you noticed.
Yes.
The outdoor set is the Palace at Versailles. The indoor set's somewhere in London.
Yeah.
But there allegedly this seminar on Christ and the orgasm is taking place at Versailles.
And somehow they've shot it with no people. There's no people. When Edna walks through Versailles, nobody's there.
The light looks pretty grey. I'd say they went probably really early in the morning.
Right.
There's a handful of people walking about.
Oh, okay.
I doubt they had the clout to close it like Lady Oscar.
Yeah. Yeah. So Barry is looking for Edna. He's looking for the Australian embassy. He tries to approach someone on the street and ask for directions. He can't explain. He's like, Australian embassy. He says, Kangaroo, Waltzing Matilda.
This is a classic joke, though. They're trying to communicate with a policeman that doesn't speak the same language as you. This one's as old as the hills.
Yes. He goes back to his place, and Kev's wife, Sherilyn, she's in the comic, also comes on to Barry, since Kev has disappeared. This happens in the comic. But Kev returns.
He does a funny line. She's coming on to him, and he's really nervous.
Yeah.
And he says something about her breasts.
This is a term that's used in the comic all the time, and it's so gross. It's the grossest term for breasts I've ever heard. And yet I secretly laughed every time he said top bollocks.
Yes, top
bollocks. They say it all the time. I'm like, this is the grossest thing.
I'm sure this must be a Humphries invention. No way anyone would call breasts top bollocks. But he says that. You got a top bollocks like a pair of mail bags. Yeah. And she says, oh, Kev doesn't know how to talk to a woman like you do. And she just throws herself at him.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then Kev comes in. "Thou dirty dingo!"
Yes.
He catches him, and then they have a punch-on in a split screen.
Much like, yes.
It's so...
With a double, of course. But
with a double, but it's seamless.
Yeah, it is seamless, and actually somehow works better than the fight with Curly we had in the first movie, which is similar. I'm not sure quite why I enjoyed it more, but anyway...
It's just better. The whole thing's just better.
Yes.
The whole movie's better shot.
Yes.
They have a fight arranger.
Right.
Which I suppose nowadays would be called a stunt coordinator.
Yeah.
A bloke called Alf Joint. I wonder, is this a real name?
Yeah, or it's nominative determinism. Okay, so now the guy from the MC or something comes up and tells them that Edna's missing. I'm sorry, yeah. We didn't know that Edna was missing before.
Well, we knew.
Oh no, because
we see her being bundled into a...
Kev knew and Barry didn't know. So Barry knows.
I don't think either of them knew, actually.
Oh, okay.
She got bundled because Kev was upside down in sort of like a rubbish dump.
Yeah.
And he's been belted and knocked out. And Edna has been abducted. She's been bundled into the back of what looks like a mail van. Oh, no. It's a blood drive van.
Yes.
Appropriately.
Yes.
These henchmen are...
But why was he looking for the embassy? That's why I thought...
Because...
Anyway.
Oh, he must... Because he lost Edna.
Right. Okay. So now we find out that...
Or it was because Kev had gone missing, maybe. Maybe it was because Kev went missing. It's not important. I think it might have been because Kev went missing, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, but now they're like, okay, well, we need to get you to England and then on to Transylvania, I guess is the plan. I'm not sure why they have to go into England, but he's not allowed in England because they've introduced new laws that Australians need work visas.
I am 100% certain this is a reference to the fact that the unions didn't like the Australian film crew working in England for this film and for last week's film.
Right, okay. So he has to go in disguise. Now the movie starts to lose it.
Yeah, agreed.
In a big way. So he shows up in blackface and a turban as a character called Abdul McKenzie.
On a camel.
He shows up on a camel.
Where do you get a camel? Anyway, whatever.
That doesn't matter. That's a gag. That's fine. He gets onto a refugee boat, which crosses the channel.
Yep.
They get into a truck, and this is fine. They're in the truck. They arrive in London, and all the brown people in the truck, there's 5, 6, 7 of them.
Yep. One's a snake charmer.
Okay, blah, whatever. But the other one is reading a book by Immanuel Kant.
Yeah.
That was, that's a non-stereotype.
Except
it's used for a gag. It's just for a gag. She says something like, I'm reading Kant.
I'm studying Kant.
And he says, I study Kant all the time.
But I keep failing the practical. Yeah. It's on the nose.
Yeah, it's a bit too obvious, yes. Okay, but here's the problem. They stop the truck and they all pile out and fast forward and run into the unemployment benefits office. Mm-hmm. This is not a racist slur said by Barry or Edna or another character. This is a thing that happens in the
world. Yep, they just run straight into the unemployment. Straight in.
Yeah.
Why is this in the film? So this is not skewering Australian foibles.
Nope.
Yeah, this isn't making fun of the French or...
Nope.
Or even making fun of the guy who thinks he's going to work in the snake charmer factory. This is just straight up...
Just a racist statement.
Racist statement about refugees.
Yeah.
Because that's what these people are.
Yep. And we didn't have anything like this in the first movie, as I recall.
No.
That was just like, here's a jab at these guys. In the first movie, we had the Indian doctor, which is not commented on, amazingly. And we had the guy working in the grocery store.
Yep.
That was trying his best to help Barry. Somehow we've gone the other direction here. Okay, so Barry is caught as a illegal immigrant, and he's thrown into a prison.
Yep.
Where he meets his uncle's ghost.
Well, he gets hassled by a couple of cops.
Yes.
Who were played by actors who were known for playing police officers in soaps.
Okay.
This is a joke for the English audience.
I see.
And one of them puts his hand in the snake charmer's basket. He's left his snake behind and gets bitten by the cobra. He says, "What's in that?" And Barry says, "This is my dirty laundry." He takes the cover off, puts his hand in, gets gets bitten by the cobra. But they arrest him and they lock him up in... It's not the tower, but it's some sort of...
Yeah. It's like a dungeon.
Yeah, a dungeon.
Yeah. And the ghost tells him how to get out of there.
Yeah.
There's like a loose brick that he had loosened when he was alive, and he manages to escape. He goes to Australia House.
There's a moment he turns around and shows the letters, the acronym on the back of his prison outfit, which says POHM, Prisoner of His Majesty.
Yeah.
That's folk etymology.
Okay.
It's that the origin of POM for English people is not actually known.
Oh,
it's almost certainly not that, because acronyms weren't widely used before the First World War.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So at some stage here he manages to get to Australia House, and I think he hooks up with Colin? No, somebody else. I can't remember who he hooks up with here. This is where we get the immigration game show. So instead of having the really pretty offensive sequence in the comic where they strip this woman naked and make her do a dance in order to get to Australia.
This one's much funnier.
Yes. It's like a quiz show.
Yeah, and
it actually...
The questions are unbelievably parochial. It's like, which Don Spencer says to this hapless POM who wants to move to Australia, which country in the world has the best films, music, poetry, literature, television shows, cuisine?
So it's like that, but then we get the bit about the no puftas. Now, meanwhile, back in Transylvania, Edna's being treated as a queen because they think she's the queen, or some factions, like the Count, thinks she's the queen. Other people, like Igor, Dorothy, are like, that's not the queen. And she's like, I'm not the queen.
Dorothy's the savvy servant, you see? The savvy manservant. He's the only one that's not taken in.
Yeah.
But they're all dismissive of his concerns.
Yeah.
And so they're fighting her, and every time she says, don't call me Your Majesty, call me, I'll call you Eric, and, you call me, and he goes, Elizabeth.
Yes.
She sort of looks at him a bit oddly.
Yes. Now, meanwhile, back at Australia House, Barry is given a debrief on who the Count is.
Yep.
And we get a kind of slideshow thing, one of these kind of espionage type scenes where you get some hilarious photos of the Count with Hitler, Nixon, Stalin, Lenin, people like that.
Yeah, he couldn't possibly have met all these people.
No.
Not the least.
Well, he's a vampire.
But yeah. But the order's messed up. He's supposed to have been active in Europe at a certain time. Yeah, presumably when he met Hitler, and then he meets like Nixon and LBJ, and then he crosses the Iron Curtain, and there's a photo of him with Lenin and Stalin. Lenin died in like 1920.
Yes, they're together. That's right.
Like 1924.
Yes. Yes.
It's not possible.
Yes. At this stage, Barry sings this Palm song, I think. I don't remember why, but again, it's another...
They get invited in for it. Well, they need a team to drop into Transylvania to rescue Edna. And they decide that the team is going to be comprised of Barry and Kev, the Rev, and also any kind of plucky Aussies with the Anzac spirit that they can rustle up.
Yes.
And they're heading out for their briefing, and then the English character, who's kind of like their pommy attaché, he says, well, do you want to come in for a drink? And of course, they're all thrilled to go in for a drink.
Yes.
But then it turns out to be a kind of posh soiree. And there's plenty of disdain coming from some of the posh poms. They keep saying cobber. And so Barry's inspired to sing a kind of coarse song about how he hopes their balls turn into bicycle wheels and
back pedal up their arses.
Yep.
Yep,
it's very jingoistic and funny. It's because they're taking the mick out of Australia, so he gets his back right up, and he says, it's the best little country in the world! Millions of drive-in bottle shops!
Yeah.
Stacks of clean-living Sheilas that root like rattlesnakes!
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Barry Humphries' genius for Australian slang seems to have abandoned him there, because, of course, no Aussie would talk about rattlesnakes. We don't have them here.
Right. Okay, so they do parachute into Transylvania.
We get footage of parachuting. The pine forest into which they're parachuting looks suspiciously like gum trees.
Right.
Because, of course, that scene was shot in New South Wales.
Yes. Okay, now they are on a mission to rescue Edna.
First of all, she's made to watch a Transylvanian tourism movie hosted by Donald Pleasence. He's showing off all these horrible buildings and talking about the industrious working class spirit of the Transylvanian peasant. And I think Bruce Beresford has a cameo there, walking by carrying a ladder. But yeah, it's hilarious, and he's just in his way through all of his lines.
Yeah.
And then Edna asks if she can put on a full film of her own
videos. Yeah.
of Sydney, and it's pretty funny.
And
they got a beach sequence where the sea wasps start attacking everybody.
Yeah, they're like giant
Well, they're jellyfish, but they're horrible tentacled monsters, and they're killing people. It's like, some of the people here made full recoveries, missing only 2 of their limbs.
Yeah.
And the vampires are all thrilled.
Yes.
they've been terribly bored up to this point, watching all this boring Australian footage of men in white socks pulled up to their knees, wearing shorts and leather shoes, walking around the streets of Sydney. And they're all bored to tears, and then the sea wasps attack, and they're all grinning, and their fangs are showing because they love the blood and guts.
Yeah. But I think this is the point where the Count starts to figure out that she's not actually Queen Elizabeth. And he hooks her up to this auto-vamp machine, which is a machine that's going to drain all her blood. And he bottles blood of people into this machine. And there's an interesting thing here because...
There's a funny pun. He keeps the blood in barrels labelled Veine Ordinaire.
Yes. Yes.
Vein Rouge.
Yes. There's a thing going on here, which is Barry in the comics. Another thing he constantly talks about is his mother's veins.
Oh, yeah.
He's constantly worried about his mother's veins. Not her nerves, her veins. And her veins acting up. And, what if her veins? What about this, that, her veins? So I feel like this storyline kind of ties into that, but we haven't had enough vein talk in these movies to really make that land in the way they want, if they're playing it the way I think they're trying to play it. Right, okay, so they finally confront the Count. At some stage, I think Colin he stakes someone with a breadstick.
He saves Barry from being... Well, first of all, Colin says he's going to go train Terrace at the Terracotta.
Yes, train Terrace at the Terracotta, yes.
And takes off. But Barry's suspicious for some reason, and with good reason, because he follows Cole and finds Cole reporting to Count von Plasma.
Right.
It turns out that Cole is a communist agent.
Right.
And Barry's horrified, but then one of the henchmen attacks... going for Barry, and Cole throws himself in front of the henchman. Is bitten fatally.
Yes.
They tussle. The vampire is staked by his baguette.
Yes, that's right.
And then Cole expires, admitting his flaws and, begging for forgiveness and asked to be buried next to a billabong.
Right.
Back in Australia.
And then Barry says he'd give away his arsehole and shit through his ribs.
That's a funny line.
Yeah, it is a funny line. Okay, so they confront the Count finally, the whole gang of them.
Count has a bit of a speech where he mentions...
How... what does it say about Australian dissidents making comics and films?
Yeah, depicting Aussies as yobs.
Yes.
Which I...
that's what they... Yeah, that was the point of it, yes. They were kind of traitors that were doing this on purpose. Barry makes a cross out of beer cans.
Yep.
And confronts the Count.
Out of Foster's cans. He makes a crucifix out of beer cans, the Foster fix.
Yeah.
And he uses it to kind of slay Donald Pleasence the vampire. And yet, it's not over, because now... The chef appears.
The chef appears, who's a character played by somebody named Seiji Suzuki, I think. But he's got... The character has a Chinese name, I think.
Well, he's Chinese. We know that he's Chinese because we get some dialogue about him being Chinese.
That's right. That's what it was.
Some racist stuff. Edna says that he's a lovely tinted fellow or something.
Yes.
Talks about how much he loves Pekingese. Like, I suppose
he says... Count says you should try Peking duck or something like that, and she says, I love Pekingese.
Yeah. Like the dog.
Because she's ignorant, yeah.
Anyway, we have a kung fu fight.
Yes, he rips off his shirt.
And he's jacked as hell.
He's so shredded, and he has a scene where he's beating up these guys. I'm like, okay, is this kind of a stereotype? Yes, of course it is, but this is maybe one of the first examples of making fun of the dubbing of martial arts movies, because he's delivering this dialogue, and it's quite funny. Like, he says, I kill all Aussie bastards, and lines like these, but it's not matching his lips. Like, it's just, like, overdone.
Well, he's not saying anything, actually. But the actor is not, he's just doing karate.
Yes.
He's like a karate master. He ended up opening some karate schools in England where he was living it.
Right.
And, he's not actually... His mouth's not moving at all.
That's right.
It's closed, actually.
That's right.
Someone, presumably Humphries, is dubbing over this stuff in kind of like a silly Chinese accent. Yeah. I'm surprised you liked it, because I thought it kind of spoiled it for me. Because this scene I thought was really quite good.
Yeah.
Like, this guy, he knows his stuff, and he's kicking the shit out of everybody. There's a really great line here where, because we got these 50 guys piling on to this one Chinese chef, and he's just beating the crap out of all of them. And then
one of them yells something at him, "Fight like a man," which which I laughed so hard because they're piling on him 50 on 1.
Yep.
And they're saying, "Fight like a man." It was so great.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a really funny scene, but unfortunately I felt like I didn't find it as funny as you did with that voiceover. I just heard him saying stupid stuff in a silly accent.
Yeah, maybe I didn't notice the accent that much. But
he was saying dumb stuff too. It wasn't just kill all Aussie bastards. He was saying...
Yeah, well, at first I was like, what is going on here? And then when I realized he was making fun of the dubbing of martial arts movies, then it started to fall into place a bit more for me.
But just some of the stuff he said was a bit on the nose too. That's all. This sequence looks good.
Yeah.
So this isn't, as you said, it's not like the fight with Curly in the last movie.
Yeah, no.
Someone had...
Here's your fight arranger.
Alf Joint. This fight was well shot and well edited.
Yeah.
And this guy, he was doing karate.
Yeah.
Like a boss.
Yeah.
He's throwing kicks out.
Yeah.
He's doing handstands. He's blocking. He's punching. He's flipping guys around. It was pretty rad.
Yeah.
This is like 74, you know.
Yeah.
Putting a kung fu sequence in your Australian movie. This is like, I think The Man from Hong Kong comes out in 1975. Putting kung fu sequences in your Aussie film, or even your English language film is kind of not that common at this point.
Well, Enter the Dragon comes out 73.
Right.
And I don't know, I mean, a lot of these movies were arriving, certainly in California and New York. A lot of martial arts movies, dub martial arts movies. I don't know how many were coming to Australia at this stage. It is unusual, it seems to me, to put a sequence like this in an Australian movie at this point in time. I could certainly see it happening in America.
Look, it's 100% riffing on martial arts films that have crossed over from Asia. It doesn't make sense in any other capacity, and presumably it was a dubbing joke. But it's just so out of place in a film of this era.
Yes, and in a vampire movie.
Yeah, just to have, I mean, it's just the whole film's just ludicrous. But I really dug this sequence a lot.
Yeah.
And then Barry ends up decking him, basically.
Yes, by spraying him with beer.
By spraying him with beer.
Yeah, and that's enough to distract him.
Incidentally, I'm complaining about him. He's talking about Poofters a lot as well, this Chinese character, you know, stuff like that. Incidentally, the only Poofter gag I liked was... There's a scene that we've skipped over, which is when Barry steps in dog shit.
Yeah.
And then throws up on Delamfrey.
Yeah.
And then the comely black lady invites him back to her flat to get cleaned up.
Yes.
Which he thinks he's going to score. But actually, she just wants to take photos of him for her magazine, which is called, what's it called again? Jet? Or maybe...
Jet's a real magazine. I don't think it was... I can't remember.
It's called something like Jet.
Yeah.
Maybe it was riffing on Jet, but it's the magazine with balls.
Yeah.
But it's made by women.
By women? Yeah.
Anyway, she just wants photos of him for the magazine, but he's mistaken into thinking that she wants to sleep with him. And she takes a picture of him in the nude, in the bath, and he's got a can of Foster's over his little problem, which he's opened and it's shooting foam out.
Yeah.
And then she says, "That was brilliant. Okay, come out into the living room and I've got something special for you." You know, and he's like, "Oh yeah." And he goes out and he goes into her bedroom in the nude. So is this going to be worth all the build-up? And in bed he can see a figure lying in the bed and an arm. And he goes, "Yeah, oh yeah, you know, she's going to bang like a dunny door in a typhoon or something." But he drops his towel and jumps in bed, and of course it's a huge dude.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's like, "What are you doing?" And the guy, and Barry like jumps out of bed, it's like, oh, he falls down and falls ass over tea kettle into a chair.
Yeah.
And then the girl comes in, and he goes, "What have I told you about bringing these poofter models back here? He's this huge guy."
Yeah.
He's like, "Especially the Australian ones, they're all poofters." He's saying it in this, I'm not sure what kind of accent it is.
Yeah.
Maybe he's from the island, like the
Maybe he's from
Caribbean
or something.
Yeah, and it's just such a non sequitur. This huge, and of course, because Barry just tried to get into bed with him, so he's within his rights to be labelling Barry that. And of course, it just sounds so incongruous because he's not an Aussie. He's this huge guy from the Caribbean, maybe, or from Jamaica or something. Anyway, I pissed myself laughing at that scene.
Yeah. Yep.
Back to where
they go back to Australia after they've rescued Edna.
Yes, they do. I think Yes. Yeah. Do they go back to England first? Because there's a scene in a pub.
Yes.
Yeah,
there's a scene in a pub because he sees the magazine layout that.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's back in England before they get... Okay. That is back in England because the film ends in Australia.
It's the Red Cock pub, yes.
That's right.
Yes.
And one of the blokes is reading a newspaper and the headline is Hope Fades for Cobra Victim.
Right, yes.
Which is a nice callback to that cop that got bit by the cobra earlier.
Yeah. They return to Australia. There's a huge crowd waiting to greet them.
Yep, to greet Barry and Edna.
Why are they heroes? Oh, for toppling the communist government of Transylvania, I guess. Yeah. And Golf Whitlam is there.
And Margaret Whitlam.
For probably 20, 30 seconds of screen time to greet them. And also to give Edna damehood. So maybe this is the first Dame Edna?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
That's it. This is where that comes from.
This is the moment when it happened.
Also, that was an ad-lib by Whitlam.
Right, okay.
Yeah. It's not in the script.
Right.
He just came up with it on the spot, and then Humphries incorporated it into his act thereafter.
For 30 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. End credits says shot on location at vast expense in Sydney, Paris, London, and Transylvania. Is how the credits. It's funny credit, but again, there's no credit for Nicholas.
That's a shame, and I can't explain that, and it just feels cruel.
Very weird. Massive oversight, the world's biggest oversight? Don't know. Okay, any trivia?
Yeah, sure. So as we mentioned, this film was funded privately, so no government grants this time.
Okay.
Funded by Reg Grundy, the television mogul, to the tune of 450,000 Australian dollars.
The first one was 200?
250, so almost double.
Almost double, yeah.
Came out in December 1974, and in the Australian box office it made 1.4 million Australian dollars.
Okay.
So handily making its budget back and making a profit. That's the figures just for the Australian box office, where obviously it's done. That's a very good result for a film in the 1970s. Even made $400,000 more than the first movie.
A little bit surprised there's not a third one, considering we had 5 Crocodile Dundees or something ridiculous like that. 4?
I can't answer why that didn't happen.
Huh.
Apparently there were talks.
Okay.
Both Barry Crocker and Barry Humphries, a lot of Barrys in this franchise, have each said that there were talks about another film. Barry Humphries claims that he spoke to an unnamed producer about doing a fish out of water story in the US where Barry would run up against drug dealers.
That's the plot of Crocodile Dundee 3, isn't it? Or 2?
Well, it's like all the Crocodile Dundee movies, isn't it? Yeah, so I probably think Humphries is full of shit, and this meeting never happened, because he's on the record as saying that he thinks Crocodile Dundee ripped off.
Okay, let me ask you a vague question.
For the record, before you ask the question, Barry Crocker has a different story.
Okay.
He said that it was going to have a completely different plot.
Okay.
But it just didn't happen.
Do you think there was a shift from cultural cringe of the first movie to Golf Whitlam being in the second movie? There was such a tremendous sea change in level of pride that somehow thematically a third movie can be made. I have no way to clarify my question because I'm not clear on what my question is.
Has something changed culturally between when
where
film
you have
1 came out?
Film 1 is like Australian ugliness, and film 2 is like, we're proud of this, here's Golf Whitlam.
I'd be reluctant to lay too much emphasis on that reading because the turnover's so quick and the same people are making it.
Yes.
I think the film was wildly successful, the first one, by Australian standards.
Yes.
As I said, the first film to make $1 million...
Right.
I really should have looked that up, because I don't know if the comics can be read in Australia yet by this point.
Right, but the comics were suppressed.
But they were suppressed.
But by the time you get to 74, the Prime Minister of the country is in the movie.
There's been...
So something has changed wildly.
Oh, now I get the question. Okay, now I understand. Yes, something has changed.
To the point where the character is not... It's almost like a sellout of what the character was supposed to be, or the character doesn't... The theme of the character is no longer in existence. It's like a completely different thing that it doesn't make sense to make a third.
I can speak... No, I would say that's probably not the case. What's happened is that there's been a broader change. I mean, first of all, it's the 70s, not the 60s.
Yeah.
So despite the swinging 60s reputation, the 60s could be quite straitjacketed, especially in Australia. The decade of kind of like genuine, I suppose, social progress, kind of like a lot of philosophical and intellectual progression is kind of like the decade of the 70s. Decade of the 70s where you get all these wild social theories, all these new teaching methodologies, all these methods that are all about, kind of all these postmodern teaching and pedagogical methods all arrive in the 70s, not the 60s. 60s is kind of like just bourgeois, rich kids getting high. So the other thing as well that's occurred in Australia in the 1970s is that the coalition government that had governed Australia for about 26 years, from the end of the Second World War kind of through to 1972, had finally been tossed out by the Whitlam government. And this is like a massive change as well, because the Whitlam government is like lionised these days. It's incredibly progressive. Gough Whitlam is a hero to many people, including myself, as being kind of like this superlative, brilliant kind of legislature who kind of like dragged Australia kicking and screaming out of the 1950s into the 1970s and set up all kinds of institutions and got rid of all kinds of retrograde policies and legislation that had characterised kind of like these decades that Humphries is criticising with his comics, allegedly. So I would say the fact that Whitlam appears in the film, is indicative of kind of like that change. I'm sure it's honestly amazing, really, that he's in it. I don't think any other Australian Prime Ministers appeared in a movie. I'm not sure that's true, actually, but it's wild. According to Humphries, they just asked him. So they wrote the script first. They said, Beresford and Humphries wrote the script, said, the Australian Prime Minister meets them at the airport.
So it could be an actor playing.
Yes, and apparently Beresford said to Humphries, okay, we just need a bloke, we need to find a bloke that looks like the Prime Minister.
Right.
To which, this is Humphries telling this story, so take it with a grain of salt. He says, well, I know a guy that looks like the Prime Minister and he lives in Canberra. Why don't we see...
Well, that's a funny joke. Even if it's not true.
Why don't we see if he's... Well, they got him.
Yeah.
So apparently they just sent out feelers.
Yeah.
And he said, this is shortly before... Yeah, so this is in 1974, isn't it? Yeah. So Whitlam's star is on the wane by this point. His government was becoming unpopular by now.
Okay.
He holds an election, I think, in 74 that doesn't go very well. And then, of course, in 75, he is thrown out of office in our own version of local electoral interference. Right. In a kind of coup by the Governor-General in collusion with the palace in England and Malcolm Fraser, who would later go on to be Prime Minister. Very nasty affair. Anyway, but, he's in the movie. Gough Whitlam, so that's pretty cool. More trivia. Okay, so as I said, this was shot in early 1974, shot on location, as that said, in England, Wales and Paris, not Transylvania. Wales is the stand-in for the Transylvania. They shoot it at a castle north of Cardiff. As mentioned, they used the Versailles Palace exterior but the interiors were done in not in London, in Devon, a huge palace-like edifice, quote-unquote, in Devon. Australia House in London was the actual location, and apparently the scenes in the ambassador's office were shot in the actual ambassador's office. Okay. Big if true. The guy that plays the Australian ambassador, incidentally, was the dad from Skippy. Okay. We mentioned it. Okay. Called Ed Devereaux. We mentioned Skippy last week, so there's a callback there. The hapless Brit that wants to stand tall in Australia and is forced to answer those mental questions in the game show was played by another kind of a British character actor with a very long career. I looked at his Wikipedia page and he has hundreds of roles, hundreds of credits across film, stage, television and radio. He was in the 1981 Radio 4 production of Lord of the Rings, where he played Bilbo.
Wow, okay.
John LeMessurier. I really loved that production of Lord of the Rings. It's really, really good.
Okay.
I can recommend it to anyone. The Chunder.
Okay. We've got two vomits.
Two vomits this time, as opposed to one in the last film, and the scale is a bit more ridiculous. For the one where it's down off the Eiffel Tower, they did actually go up the Eiffel Tower, but that street shot was not in Paris. That was shot in London.
Okay.
Where they throw the chunder on them. Then for the scene where Barry spews on Delamphere again when he's in a taxi after having stepped in dog crap, they actually built a chunder gun. It was a compressed air machine, and then they gaffer taped the hose to the side of Barry Crocker's cheek.
Okay.
Apparently had such power that it knocked off Barry Humphries' wig on the first 2 takes.
Wow.
But speaking of Humphries' childish fascination with bodily functions, like vomiting, chundering, pissing, crapping, etc., he was asked in, I think, a 2003 documentary if the chundering, or maybe it was a contemporaneous one, making of, if the chundering scenes were necessary, to which he replied, "It's always amused sort of the infant in me, I suppose. Human indignity that has a comic aspect. I quite like seeing adults falling over in the street, for example, when they're running to catch buses. I think of people slipping on a banana peel. I think that's very funny. I also think the people who empty chamber pots out of windows and inundate pedestrians is hilarious. This is again a great classical tradition. And if you look at the Flemish painters, if you look at Bruegel, younger and elder, you'll see in the corner of every picture someone chundering out a little window. You know, all those paintings, all those little figures in them, there's someone doing something to someone in every one of them. There's always a chunder scene in the Flemish masters. They never painted a religious picture without a small chunder scene. So this is merely my tribute, really, I suppose, to the tradition of Flemish painting. We had one chunder scene in the first movie. We were copied in The Exorcist. I'm not suing. And I thought, he's obviously taking them in. Yeah. And I thought, we'll have to have 2 in our next movie, and so we have. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, you could look at that 2 ways. He's either taking the piss out of himself, or he's dead serious, and he thinks that, and he thinks his chunder scenes in his movie are equivalent to a tiny panel.
He does, but I think he thinks they're fun.
Yeah. He also, he's such a wanker. He also, defending the crudity of the films, he mentioned Chaucer and his kind of ribald poetry and humour. And he also, no bullshit, claimed that the pissing out the fire in the comics in the first movie was inspired by a similar scene in Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, where Gulliver puts out the fire...
Oh, in Lilliput?
In Lilliput, yeah. Ridiculous. They're not remotely comparable. Oh dear.
Is that it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I could digress for a moment about... I mean, last week I mentioned that I don't particularly like Barry Humphries. I don't really like his comedy, although I did enjoy these comics.
Yeah.
And I don't like him as a person.
Right.
I don't like his politics. I don't like the hypocrisy of the way he presented himself on stage in comparison to the very public opinions he held about the way governments should operate and the way people should live their private lives. From the 1970s onwards, he spent 10 years on the board of Quadrant magazine, which is a notoriously right-wing magazine here in Australia. He's always... And, you sense it in the film that he's very critical of, people that he considers pretentious or not belonging. Film... certain types of academics... people that are, we get some stabs in this movie against the left wing. So obviously it makes sense to make Count von Plasma a communist because he's literally from Transylvania, which is in Romania, a communist country. On the other hand, we have some stabs at the Labour Party in Australia. We have their disguise for sneaking into Transylvania is to pretend to be members of Young Labour.
Yes.
And, they're given... they're told that they love... that you have to believe the sun shines out of Stalin's asshole, and they wear badges that say...
BOR, it's BOR, B-O-R-E.
The acronym is BOR. Yeah. I can't remember what it stands for. So kind of some cheap shots at kind of like the left by tying associating them with communist extremism. Again, a very, really common thing that conservatives do. He called himself a bohemian and enjoyed shocking people. And yet... in his politics, he was conservative.
Yeah.
And this Barry McKenzie book said that this was a paradox that rested in his politics and personality. I don't think paradox is the wrong word. I think hypocrisy is the word.
Right.
Incidentally, even this kind of panegyric book said that one of the reasons why Humphries was conservative was because he didn't believe people were equal, and he resented efforts by government to try and make them equal, and that he considered himself as an artist to be above certain other types of people. Okay. One of the reasons why I assume he resented efforts by governments to fund the arts is because he would have seen it as going
more
to
democratic,
and as going to people that were undeserving.
Yeah.
But to return to Gough Whitlam, who I think a much better person, and actually a much funnier person, he was well known for his witticisms as well.
Okay.
Actually, kind of like a very educated man, educated in the classics, but fond also of what we might call ribald humour. There's one example I'll read to you. When Whitlam was interviewed in the year 2000, he told a story about a session in Parliament where a member representing a rural seat stood up and was ranting and raving about something. At this time, the National Party, the junior party in the coalition, was called the Country Party. He stood up, this guy's called Sir Winton Turnbull. He stood up and said, "I am a country member." To which Gough replied, "Yes, I remember. I am a country member. Yes, I remember." He says, Sir Winton could not understand why, for the first time in all the years he had been speaking in the House, there was instant and loud applause from both sides. There's another, he was also, unlike the kind of double entendres that Humphries was fond of, he liked kind of like erudite puns. So Malcolm Fraser, who I mentioned, who was the Prime Minister after Whitlam and was one of the figures responsible for him losing office in 75, they're both tall men. Whitlam said of Fraser and himself, "He is lofty, I am eminent." Both of which mean tall, or to be high, but one of course means simply to be tall, the other means of course to be set above.
Yeah.
One final story.
Okay.
There is a prominent trade unionist called Joe de Bruin who's famous for his opposition to homosexuals and gay marriage. In the news recently last year for giving a speech at a graduation at Australian Catholic University, at which the student body walked out in protest to his comments against gay marriage. This opposition is of long standing, going back many decades, at least as early as 2003, where at an AWU meeting, Australian Workers' Union, Gough Whitlam said of Joe, who was born in the Netherlands, "Joe de Bruin is a Dutchman who hates dykes." And that's enough of the wit and wisdom of Gough Whitlam. Oh, I will say that he said, both Humphries and Whitlam have confirmed that Arise Dame Edna was an ad-lib by the Prime Minister. Okay. Later in life, Whitlam said, "It was the only imperial honour I ever awarded."
Okay, so we'll retain our votes for the comic since you didn't read any more this week.
I did, as I said, I flicked through it. I didn't make a serious read, but I flicked through it, and yes, I'm still yay.
Yeah.
I really do think they're funny.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say about that.
Okay, this week's movie, better than last week's.
Yes.
With greater crimes than last week's.
Yes.
So in some ways better, some ways
higher
worse.
highs and lower lows.
Yeah. Did I say yay or nay last?
I don't recall, but it was probably nay, because I said nay. Yeah, and I'm more inclined to be forgiving.
Then it's nay. I think, even though I did like the first half hour of it or so, and then it kind of went in the wrong direction. I mean, in terms of, it lost the satirical, what am I trying to say? It became offensive in the wrong way. It became offensive in a way that was not self-aware or deliberate. It was like unintentionally offensive.
Yeah, to reiterate what I said earlier, I think that this film is there are more instances of racism, sexism, and homophobia in this second film than there were in the first one.
Yeah.
And you can't look past it because it's relentless. Having said that, this is a better film in almost every way.
Yes.
Better written, better shot, better directed, better edited. There are better performances, and I think that the fantastical elements make these constant instances of unforgivable slurs not palatable, but they put them in a framework where they're clearly meant to be something stupid and ridiculous that people are doing. I'm still going to vote nay because it's just too much.
Yeah.
I just couldn't cope with it, and I don't think I'll watch it again. But I couldn't stand to hear the slurs, but I knew that they were wrong.
Yes.
Whereas in the first film...
And the movie knows they're wrong.
Yep, sorry, I should say the movie knows they're wrong. I knew they were wrong, obviously.
The movie knows they're wrong. In the first movie, it's not like that. When he insults the story of the cab driver in the opening scene, you're like...
When he calls him an Aikimo, it's just played straight.
Yeah.
Whereas when he uses that same kind of slur in the beginnings of this film on this ridiculous plane called Frog Air, where there's waitresses in lingerie having sex with the pilot, smoking enormous cigars and serving literal live frogs, it's part of that.
Yes.
Rather than part of, I guess, our world.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, it's both.
Yeah.
Yes. So, look, I am going to...
Look, it's a nay but it's got some good stuff in it. That's what I'd say.
Definitely. A huge improvement on last week, I think, yeah.
How do you feel about this one as an adaptation of the comic versus last week?
For the same reasons I'm voting yay. I mean, it has plenty of elements from the comic.
Yeah. Because
of the medium, it's hilarious because every single dialogue is... Every time Barry talks, it's just in this incomprehensible gibberish.
Yeah.
And you can sustain that in the comic. Whereas in the film, I think every now and again he has to talk in plain prose in order for like a scene to advance.
Yes.
I think if you want to make a Barry McKenzie film, it's going to help to have a narrative. Because a film, you have to sit through it for 90 minutes. You can't just pick up and read 3 panels and put it back down. It's a good adaptation in that sense. It's also a plain adaptation in that it adapts elements of the...
Yeah.
Like all the ones that you mentioned, all of those stories, and even retell some creatively, like when they combine the Kev the Rev story with the orgasm seminar story.
Yes. I also think the martial arts sequence is something that would happen in the Barry McKenzie world, but can't really be done in a comic. Because specifically it's from the medium of cinema. So it makes sense to put it in a movie. So that was like a good move to put that in there.
Yeah.
Because it's like a Barry McKenzie scene, but it wouldn't work in the comic. Yeah, I'm going to say, I think I said nay last week, but I think it's a yay. I think actually that even the personality of Barry, which I had an issue with last week, is closer in this version. He's kind of a dummy that doesn't have agency in the comic, and he's just kind of shuttled from one thing to the next. He's just kind of bounced around, and I think it's a bit more like that in this. Yep. He doesn't really have a choice in anything that's happening. It's all just kind of happening to him. And he's just kind of dumb and hapless in going through it. So it felt more like the comics than last week's did, even though so many storylines last week were straight out of the comics.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a good adaptation.
Okay, yeah.
From both our perspectives.
Yeah. Okay, please like, rate, review, subscribe. Please join us on Facebook or Instagram or Blue Sky. Don't use them anymore, but you can send us a DM. You can also leave a comment on YouTube, like
please.
This week.
We get a notification and we'll be right on it.
Yes. You can also email us at the email address in the show notes. And please join our Patreon at patreon.com/comicmovieoblivion. Do need the money for hosting fees and the books like this week, and there was something else that came up.
Foster's. It costs money, man.
Foster's.
You know, we didn't even discuss Foster's. No one in Australia drinks Foster's.
Yeah.
They used to, and then...
Did they used to drink it at the time these movies were made? Or was it already anachronistic?
I think they still drank it when these movies were made.
Okay.
And I don't know what... Maybe, Barry Humphries, Bruce Beresford, Philip Adams, all these people associated with the production keep insisting on how influential it was. Maybe this film played a role in why Foster's disappeared from the Australian alcohol landscape.
Right. Okay, so actually we lost our one patron. So we've actually got nobody at the moment. I noticed when I did my taxes last week, I noticed that we lost our patron about 5 months ago. So please jump on there. I'm begging you. We don't what was I going to say? We don't have any other financing.
Oh, damn. We couldn't have done... We had to buy the books.
There's no rewards.
We'll invent some rewards.
Yeah. Yeah, if you have an idea of what you think a good reward would be, like longer episodes.
Yeah,
or,
longer. God, they couldn't possibly be any. Filmed episodes so you can see me splash beer everywhere.
Anything. If
you want to choose...
If you want me to write some essays or something, or if you want transcripts or something.
If you want to choose which comics we do, which movies we do. If you want us to do cheat episodes, we could share our cheat list.
Oh, yeah, we could do separate cheat episodes on the Patreon if we were getting enough money for them, I guess.
Make it happen, listeners.
The cheat episodes would be episodes that are like comics based on movies.
Yeah.
Instead of the way we're normally doing. Or comics or movies that just seem like they're based on comics, but they're not.
But they're not quite.
Yeah.
Yep.
So all that kind of stuff could be a possibility.
Yep.
As you know, if you think that's a good idea, let us know, and please, join, and then we'll set it up, and then maybe we'll get some Patreon patrons. Okay, next week we will do The Surrogates with Bruce Willis from 2009.
Second appearance of Bruce after Sin City.
Yes. Yeah, it took us a minute to figure that out because it's been a long time since we did Sin City.
It has.
And anything else? Oh yeah, so the comics are pretty easy to get, and the movies should be easy to find. These are pretty... I don't think the movie's a big hit, but I think we'll get that factoid... Or not factoid, I shouldn't say that. Factlet next week. And I think that covers it.
Barry McKenzie Holds His Own really is the Australian equivalent of Strange Brew, featuring as it does another storied European character actor, playing a villain in False Teeth.